Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate elder care planning and life transitions.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, elder care planning, and the senior living industry. Coming up on today's show, living with autism. We're going to hear from a parent of 2 children with autism, and we'll be discussing things like parental challenges, importance of early diagnosis, and why things are looking up for a prosperous integration into society. And also on the show, why a power of attorney may not hold any weight when it comes to the protection of a loved one. We'll be talking about protection mandates, homologations, and how does it all work. If you know someone experiencing cognitive decline with the beginning of dementia, for example, or related diseases such as Alzheimer's, you'll be wanting to tune in, and that's going to be coming up on the second half. Corey Sirota is off today, and for good reason. She's been invited to be the keynote speaker in Toronto this weekend for the 2022 Mothers Against Drunk Driving Canada National Conference for Victims of Impaired Driving. So good on you, Corey. She'll be talking about myths about grief and loss, and very proud of our co-host here on Life Unrehearsed and spreading the word in Toronto at their national conference. I also want to give a shout out to, boy, oh boy, the Atlantic provinces you've seen and heard on the news that Tom was just talking about with Hurricane Fiona. Many listeners, like me, probably have relatives in the Maritimes. I have family in Nova Scotia and PEI, and my mom was reaching out to her sisters there, and it's interesting. They're saying, boy, we are so lucky. And lucky means they've got trees downed all over their properties, but nothing hit their house or their cars. So it's amazing. We're thinking of you out there. And in fact, the one in PEI, those of you that may know PEI, the Stanhope Golf Course, my aunt there lives across the street, and saying the pro shop and clubhouse is on fire. And this was just a couple of hours ago. So count ourselves lucky here in Montreal, where we, pretty well became unscathed, but we're thinking of people that have been affected by that hurricane. All right. Now, the odds are that either you have a direct family member affected by autism, or you know someone that is dealing with a person on the autism spectrum. You know, we wanted to get the perspective of a parent to share her experience with us. Dr. Sazini Nzula is a mother of 2 children living with autism. 2 sons, in fact, 15 years old, soon to be 16, and another son 12 years old. Sazini is the author of a wonderful book called Beautiful Inside and Out: What You Ought to Know About Autism, How to Embrace the Unique Way Your Child is Flourishing. And Sazini, we want to welcome you to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very grateful that you invited me. And like you, I have a connection to the Maritimes, and I am thinking of the people there who were also very lucky. The ones I know, at least, their houses are safe, and I'm very, very grateful.
Oh, no, great. And yes, in fact, you have a connection there as well. Interesting, Sazini. You're in studio for our listeners to know, and this is rare. Yes. We're starting to have more and more people in studio. So glad to have you here. All right. It seems like we're hearing more and more people on the autism spectrum. So, are the statistics and facts actually backing this up, Sazini?
Yes, they are. I mean, of course, firstly, because of the increased awareness, we do feel like we are hearing more about autism, but there are numbers that are backing that up. For example, in 2000, the number of people with autism was 1 in 150, and by 2021, it was 1 in 44, and that's US data, but Canadian data is similar.
Amazing to see. You know, we're just seeing it more and more, and the facts are actually backing that up. So why do you think those figures are going up?
Well, there's several reasons, really. I mean, first of all, the tools that we have for diagnosing are better, and also how we're diagnosing, who we're diagnosing. A few years ago, it was people who were really severe who were diagnosed with autism, and now people who are less impacted are also being diagnosed with autism. So that, of course, increases the numbers. And we're diagnosing younger people as well as adults in their 20s and 30s, 50s even, who are being diagnosed with autism for the first time. So that inflates the number. And lastly, we have no idea.
Yeah, interesting. You know, it's just evolving.
Yeah.
And It's so true. We really don't have it yet.
There's a portion we don't know why.
Well, you're listening to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, and we're talking with Sazini Nzula about the challenges of autism, and her 2 children are on the spectrum. Now, speaking of your family, tell us about your family situation.
Well, I live with my husband. I'm married to Ben Coringavel, and we have 2 wonderful kids, Jaden and Ethan. They are almost 16 and almost 13. But for us, the extra challenge is that we have no family here. And as you can probably tell, the listeners can probably tell from my accent, I wasn't raised in Canada, so I have no family here. And that really made it very challenging for us. We had no support.
No, you're, I guess, in a way, like an island on your own. And it's interesting. I've talked to many parents who do have a lot of family here, and even they feel like like on an island on their own. So it must be more difficult for your family. And we want to talk about that. We're going to be even talking about resources that have helped you and your family. So let's go back. When did you find out about your children being on the spectrum, and can you describe your feelings at the time?
Oh, this takes me back. When Ethan was little, sometimes as a mom, you know that there's something. You have this feeling, but you don't know what it is. You just have this gut feeling. And I had to push my pediatrician, because at the time in Quebec, only a psychiatrist could diagnose. And the psychiatrist lived in France. So there was a long waiting list. So even before we got the official diagnosis, I got him diagnosed by a psychologist. And when we finally got it, it was a mixture of kind of grief, but also relief that I had a name. I knew what that feeling had been. Mm-hmm. But it was hard at the beginning,
Oh, it must be emotional, and I've talked very often on air about my daughter, I have a special needs young adult daughter, now 24 years old, but I'll never forget. She's not on the spectrum, but considered high-functioning special needs, and probably diagnosis around 3 years old. And I remember my emotions at the time. So upset at the person giving the diagnosis,
like it's their fault.
Exactly. And then, once the dust settles, you're almost blessed that, okay, I'm glad we were able to get this diagnosis, because now, you have to start setting plans in place, and this is your reality. And so speaking of early diagnosis, I know in my case and in your case, we were very lucky for early diagnosis. How important is early diagnosis?
Honestly, it's almost everything. And I'm saying almost because I've met many parents whose kids are diagnosed older, and they feel so guilty that they didn't get the diagnosis early. And for those, you know what? That's why I'm saying it's almost. But if you have the chance, get your kids diagnosed as early as possible, because then you know what you're dealing with. Then you know how you can help them. Because for me, I used to think with my son Ethan, I used to think, okay, I need to help him build new pathways, like neuronal pathways, build new connections in his brain. It's like building a road. So the longer time you have to build new habits, to build new things, the more you can help your child. That's why it's so important. But also for government services. For some services, you can't get in services without an official diagnosis. You can't open a registered disability savings plan without an official diagnosis. You can't get help in school without a code. So it's really important to get your child diagnosed as early as possible.
Yeah, and I guess I could attest in myself as well. And I've talked to many families and parents that they feel like it's too late. My children are already 7 or 8 and there's no diagnosis, but that, there's hope, right?
It's never too late. One of the things we've learned now is that the brain continues to evolve with time. So we continue to learn. So it doesn't matter at what age your child gets diagnosed. They can still learn new things. You can still help them. You can still work on their core deficiencies. So for those parents who didn't get their kids diagnosed at 2 and 3, it's never too late. Even adults, it's never too late.
Listen to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio, and that's the voice of Sazini Nzula, and we're talking about some of the challenges of autism, and her 2 children are on the spectrum. Sazini, by the way, is the author of a wonderful book called Beautiful Inside and Out, What You Ought to Know About Autism, How to Embrace the Unique Way Your Child is Flourishing. Sazini, we have to head out for a traffic update. However, we're going to talk about some very valuable resources for parents or grandparents that might be listening. And also, I know for sure in the case of my daughter, and you're seeing it with your children as well, the prospect of integrating into society successfully and employers really stepping up their game for people with autism. We're going to be talking about that as well. And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Del Vecchio, and we're talking with Sazini Nzula about the challenges of autism. Her two children are on the spectrum. She has two sons, a 15-year-old who's soon to be turning 16, and also a 12-year-old. And Sazini is the author of a wonderful book called Beautiful Inside and Out, What You Ought to Know About Autism, How to Embrace the Unique Way Your Child is Flourishing. And Sazini, I want to continue our conversation. You've been so helpful with words of advice, and one of the things that I think are very hopeful, if we say there's going to be silver lining, if you have a family member with autism or know of someone that is dealing with autism, because of the increased awareness, and quite frankly, I would say perhaps that the labor shortage has actually helped, but employers seem to be more accepting of hiring people with special needs, including autism. Do you see that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm very excited about it because it gives me hope for my own kids, because when my oldest son was diagnosed, these services didn't exist. In fact, a few months ago, not that long ago, I attended a conference given by one of the schools here, Giant Steps, where they invited people in the hotel industry who are employing people with autism. It's a big hotel chain, the Fairmont Hotels, but there are so many. We have a Canadian organization that helps both employers and employees. It's called Ready, Willing, and Able. There's an international organization called Specialisten, and then we've got a lot of local organizations like OMETS and many others that can help with employment.
Yeah, and that's very encouraging. My daughter, as mentioned, who has special needs, young adult, and she's in that gray zone, 24, 25, where the education system sort of ends, and now you need to get integrated into society, and she is very much involved with OMITS. They're amazing. But other organizations can help with trying to find employment. And I also want to give a shout out to the employers that are accepting and open to that. I'll tell you, my daughter just had an interview yesterday, and I'll give a shout out to winners, and this is who it was, and they actually brought her on board, and they're going to give her a trial, and she starts next weekend working in the retail store there. So I cannot tell you what that means to her and also as parents. And
yes.
You mentioned your children a little younger, soon to be 16 and 12, but I would hope, and you see it more than most, that it's encouraging to see what's out there.
For sure. Congratulations to your daughter, and really a big shout out to all the employers, and they're in every industry, hotels, they can be car manufacturers, Ernst & Young accountants. What really encourages me is that it's these big companies that are leaders like Amazon or Sephora, companies that everybody knows that are opening themselves up, or banks like BMO has a program for hiring people with special needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there is more than just hope. This is real. And quite frankly, I'll even say the pandemic, there's a silver lining of pandemics with this labor shortage. It's helped people with autism and special needs, and because employers are more open and accepting of this. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, and we're talking with Sazini Nzula about the challenges of autism. She has two children, and I know for a fact, Lisa's mom was just amazing when it came down to looking for resources, and you've had to do all this. You mentioned something very important. Your family, you're alone. Mm-hmm. You have no other family members here, and usually it's a village, and in fact, your village is just you and your husband, right, with the kids. And so can you share some of your experiences about some of the important resources that maybe we can share with our listeners?
Absolutely. My village, I really want to shout out the people that I reached out to first, and they were so welcoming, were the West Island Association of Intellectually Handicapped, or WIRE, and they help everybody, not just in the West Island, from across Montreal, from off island. We have organizations like Autism Montreal. We have schools like Giant Steps. Giant Steps has a resource center that anybody can use. And now we have Facebook groups where you can just reach out to parents, and there's so many resources in the local community, because those ones will be the most helpful.
Right. And of course, we were talking off air, and a big shout out also to Summit School.
Yes, my kids, my oldest son goes there.
And my daughter went there too. And so such a wonderful organization. So more and more, and Giant Steps building a huge. Wonderful educational facility right now as we speak. It's wonderful. Yeah. So All right, Sazini, I'd love to get some words of advice, and we're going to take this in two angles here. Okay, Can you first start us off with some words of advice to friends and family to support the actual person living with autism?
Well, I'll take that in two routes as well. First of all, for parents whose child has just been diagnosed, because it's really scary and you can't imagine that things will get better. And I want to tell them that, it gets better. In a few years, you'll look back and you won't believe just how lost you were feeling. And just treat your child the way you always would have treated them. Don't put them in a little box and treat them like an egg, because they're not an egg. They're still your child, and treat them that way. And as they get older, accept that they're adults and really presume competence in them, because they are competent. And if you set the bar high, they will reach that standard that you're setting for them, of course, with support.
Yeah, and I think you brought up such an important point about treat them like adults, like teenagers. All they want to be is normal too, and so that is such an important aspect of it. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt here, and we're talking to Sazini Nzula about the challenges of autism and some wonderful words of advice. And one last question for you, and this angle for words of advice, Sazini, is going to be aimed at that village, okay? If all the people, the family members, may be at a distance, not directly involved, how could you support the family, and how could you support someone living with autism? And we're talking about, we'll call them the villagers that are trying their best to help out.
Yes, and thank you to those people, because, it's very, very tough at the beginning. And to them, the first thing is to be open to learning and to ask questions, ask what the family needs, and maybe look to them for guidance if you're not too sure, and be happy to learn and to help out as much as possible, because it's not possible. It's very difficult for them to do it on their own, and they will really use whatever help you have. Just be open and help them out.
Lovely. Well, we have to absolutely talk about your wonderful book called Beautiful Inside and Out, What You Ought to Know About Autism. Why did you want to put this together?
I did it because at the beginning, when my oldest son was diagnosed, there was such hopelessness when a child is diagnosed. It was like, okay, my life is over. And for me, it was, what? I wanted to give a message of hope that yes, the beginning is difficult, but at the end, the last chapter in the book is how to live your dream life, how to still have that life that you wanted. You will have to modify, but you can still have the life that you always wanted.
So true. And, just when you came in studio, you handed me a wonderful little journal. If you can't see, we're on radio. I'm holding it. It's called, on the cover, Beautiful Inside and Out. And you told me a little story about the importance of a journal like this.
Oh yeah, because when I started, I didn't have a journal. I had little notes on a mason jar. Then I decided to put together a journal for parents so that they could capture those positive things that happen in their child's lives. Because when you're in the middle of a meltdown in the shopping mall, you want to have something you can look at and have those positive things that happen to just hold on to.
Wonderful. Such a great idea. And you're right. We have to take those little victories.
Yeah.
And because sometimes you're really in the inferno and not realizing that, okay, you got to step back a little bit and look at those little victories and cherish them.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Sazini, thank you so much for joining us here on Life Unrehearsed. How can our listeners get a hold of your book?
My book is available on Amazon and also from my website, drsazini.com.
All right. And that's Sazini, Sazini.
Yes.
Correct? All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's Dr. Sazini Nzula. She's the author of Beautiful Inside and Out, What You Ought to Know About Autism, How to Embrace the Unique Way Your Child is Flourishing. Thank you so much. Now, coming up on Life Unrehearsed, on our what we call our Helping Mums and Dads segment, why having only a power of attorney is not good enough when it comes to the protection of your loved ones.